Senator Sessions.
Thank you. You know, Mr. Nadler used the word gratuitous harm. I don't think that's the fair definition of where we are. It seems that the United States government and most governments in the world have defined marriage as between a man and a woman. They give preferences in several different areas, joint tax returns or other advantages of being in that relationship that's been approved by the state. The state does not require, order that people can't live together if they're same-sex couples and can't share all kinds of responsibilities and activities that they together. It does not prohibit that, but it does not give that special status. And you think about maybe brothers and sisters live together a long time and are close, just roommates or partners or friends in business or other activities, they are not given preferences either. So at some point the law has to draw lines. Our Congress has voted not long ago overwhelmingly that marriage should be defined as between a man and a woman. So that's kind of where we are, and most nations, I think, in the world would agree with that. I do note that this legislation has caused some concern among the pro-immigration forces, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops who support immigration and family unification issues in a pretty strong way, recently wrote that the reunification bill would, quote, erode the institution of marriage and family by according marriage-like immigration benefits to same-sex relationships, a position that is contrary to the very nature of marriage, which predates the church and the state. Also, Mr. Samuel Rodriguez, head of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, called it a slap in the face to those of us who fought for years for immigration reforms, adding that it would divide the very broad and strong coalition we have built on behalf of comprehensive reform. Well, I just say that to say that there's some differences here of a significant nature on this question. Mr. Nugent, just briefly, our research tells us that the countries that have approved this kind of immigration policy, at least in some form, all have more restrictions and requirements of proof than this bill would have. If you know that answer, I would like your response. If not, perhaps the ABA would take the moment to check and see how well other countries have written their law to eliminate as much fraud as possible.
Yeah, I'd prefer that the ABA submit their response in writing. But
you think the ABA had all that information when they passed the resolution adopting this?
To my knowledge, they surveyed all the other countries in terms of their requirements.
Who votes for the ABA to make such a resolution? I'm a member. I don't recall knowing that you were voting on it.
It was at the last year's meeting.
So just the delegates who showed up at the national meeting voted.
People can vote.
Right. Every delegate that showed. Was the entire ABA conference or some committee?
No, it's through the House of Delegates, so the delegates vote. And
the delegates, not the ABA members.
The delegates represent their constituents.
How many is that?
I don't have the exact number of the ABA delegates. I think it's around 500.
All right. Well, Ms. Vaughn, with regard to this fraud issue, you've done a good bit of work on that, and I saw in your statement already that it's a big problem. As I indicated, when Senator Specter and I were in the Caribbean, we were talking to a consulate official, and I'm not sure that Senator Specter was in that conference, but we got into a long discussion about this. He said this was the #1 fraud issue he faced. When they caught people flatly committing fraudulent documents, nobody prosecuted it. There was no ability to do anything about it, and it was just a constant abuse of the system, and he thought it was the most abused part of the system. How would you respond to that?
Oh, I would agree absolutely that marriage fraud is the single most difficult problem in immigrant visas, and because there are so many applications that depend on marriage and documenting marriage, and it's just it's just ripe for it. There are so many different kinds of it, and so that's why it's critically important to be able to verify that the relationships are valid, and that's why we have a provision in the law that makes the green card conditional for 2 years, and then the couple has to come back to establish that they're still married. But even so, the motivation.
They have to come back and show. Does this bill require that?
My understanding is that it imposes the same standards on permanent partners as it does on marriage cases. But the problem is that, well, for one thing, marriage itself is an institution that brings with it legal entanglements. And we think that having that the prospect of marriage is something that actually does deter some people who might be tempted to engage in marriage fraud for cash or for whatever reason, because they think it's kind of a benign crime, because it's of the legal entanglements. In other words, the spouse has access to your bank account, to your home, and so on, and you have to demonstrate the bona fides of the relationship. And so permanent partnerships have no such legal standing.
In the United States in particular.
And in the United States in particular, and in many other countries in the world. So what's the thought? You know, I can imagine somebody who would be tempted to perpetrate this kind of fraud would just say, well, what do I have to lose by establishing a permanent partnership? Nothing. If we're to end the partnership, I lose nothing. I gain from, you know, however many thousands of dollars I make for establishing this fraudulent partnership, and there's no risk to me as an individual.
How about the situation? Isn't it true that if you have a spouse in Colombia, let's say, that spouse would go to the U.S. consulate in Colombia and would present a marriage certificate of some document that virtually every nation in the world provides for people who are actually in a same heterosexual marriage relationship, right? But that kind of documentation is not available in most countries in the world, where 94% of the people who use the marriage relationship to come to the United States as a preference, that wouldn't be available. And so the consulate official has now got a real complex decision-making requirement before they can determine whether or not that's what kind of relationship it is. Wouldn't that complicate their lives significantly?
Oh, absolutely. There is. It's hard enough with marriage certificates, but at least those you can verify by calling the country's Department of Vital Statistics, or, you know, there's lots of other ways to discover that the government of that country has recognized this relationship. With permanent partnerships, they don't exist in most other countries of the world, so there would be no way that the adjudicating officer could have any confidence that this was a legitimate, officially recognized relationship, and that's very problematic.
And as a well, there are other possible partnership relationships that could be implicated by this statute, would require even further and more complex analysis. I think the clarity of the preference, the benefit, the clarity of the benefit provided to a traditional marriage relationship provides some help in keeping integrity in the system, and it's being abused. To go beyond that, I think, would really open up the system to very grave consequences. Chairman Specter, I would just offer for the record a number of letters and comments. John Sampson, a 27-year veteran of immigration enforcement with INS and its successor, U.S. Customs Enforcement, ICE. The Family Research Council, Focus on the Family, Concerned Women of America, and Eagle Forum have submitted letters that they would like to be made a part of the record. Would offer that.
Without objection, they will be made a part of the record. Thank you, Senator Sessions.